This DAC right here, the Denafrips Pontus, won the Best DAC award. Now it's funny because I always say there is no such a thing as the best or perfect DAC, speaker, amplifier, etc. But the Best DAC award is merely a befitting award title for our channel name, The Next Best Thing Studio. And maybe I purposely named our channel with this in mind in attempts to beat the YouTube algorithm and get away with using clickbaity titles, or at least I will have some excuse for doing it. As silly as this sounds, it is an award that I take very seriously and give it a lot of thought before awarding it. Now, only 5 products have won this award, and that includes the Denafrips Ares 2 DAC I reviewed back in December 2019. Like I said, only 5 products were awarded, and that's from hundreds of reviews I have done so far, and none from the same company received it twice so far until now. Because my expectations for the brand goes up as well with the award. The reason some products are not awarded is not because the products perform bad. In fact, sometimes I love the product and it's worth every possible dollar. But the best award is reserved for gear that performs ridiculously good, can compete with some of the higher end price point products in my mind. And perhaps most importantly, it is something that I would put in my own system and can be happy with for a long time. It has to move me emotionally in some way that cannot be simply explained with words. Something I would personally not mind paying my hard-earned money for. It has to be so darn good for the performance that it has to be stupid and a no-brainer to recommend. Denafrips Pontus, much like the Ares 2 that I reviewed, is a resistor-to-resistor DAC technology. So this means that they don't use DAC chips like AKM DAC chips or Saber DAC chips used in typical other DAC manufacturers. It is using resistors, precise resistors, and even though the resistor itself is technically very cheap, all resistors are. However, these resistors, the cost goes up for resistor to resistor companies because they have to buy in bulk. And they don't get to choose which resistor is most precise. The tolerance level for each resistor has to be very high for this R2R DAC to work and sound good. So this means that they have to choose the right resistor and throw away the rest. And virtually every resistor-to-resistor DAC company I have spoken to said the exact same thing, and that's why the cost of the R2R DACs are high. And not to mention the labor of someone sitting there measuring all the resistors to make sure that every single one is as precise and is within the tolerance level they specify for a certain DAC. And that's why some companies like MSB, which is a very high-end resistor-to-resistor DAC company, the cost of the DAC is very high. Now, with that being said, the Ares 2 is using 2 ladder DACs, so 2 ladders, versus the Pontus using 4 ladders. And it makes sense. You make the core of what it makes into an R2R DAC good and better. And so the Pontus has 4 ladders instead of 2, and that's the most obvious difference. Now the other biggest difference is the power supply, the source of the power, and that is that the Ares 2 had a single toroidal transformer, while the Pontus now has its entire bottom dedicated to a power supply with 2 big toroidal transformers and just a chunky, beefy looking thing. And this is very similar to a DAC that reminds me in the $10,000 region of the MSB Premier. Not saying it's exactly the same, but it looks very similar and very well built to that caliber is what I'm trying to say. And for a DAC that is just under $2,000, that is fantastic. And I was very impressed by just the sheer amount of detail that went into building the power supply. Now, some of you may not take the power supply as seriously as I do, but it is my belief that whether it's a power amplifier, a DAC, a streamer, whatever it is, the power supply is what makes a component very, very different. And usually, from my experience, when the power supply is improved, two things mainly improve for me, from my experience, and that's clarity, less grain, etc., and the more full-bodied sound that sounds just more analog to me. And that's what you get with the Pontus, compared to the Ares 2, which was very analog sounding. Now you take that to the Pontus, and the Pontus is now more full-bodied while retaining the analog sound in that mid-range and the area highs I was raving about in the Ares 2. And most importantly, and maybe not something that you will notice right away, something that you would notice right away will be the full-body sound. And second, when you keep on listening to it, you notice that the sound, the resolution has changed, meaning deeper soundstage, wider soundstage, higher, just everywhere, more holographic. And I was playing this track called Electrified, and there was this electricity in the air. And this type of feeling, this track really gives you that feeling when you play with a high-end component speaker system. You get that experience with this track. Now in the back, you obviously get more inputs than the Ares 2. It is a higher-end DAC with more back room, so you get more inputs. They even have the I2S, which you can use with some of the transports out there. I personally have not used it, but you certainly can, and that is something that is up and coming in my opinion. I've seen it a lot more than I used to, and some people swear by it, like PS Audio. They have components that matches that, so it is good to have, and you should definitely experiment with it. I just didn't use it. You also get the non-oversampling mode and the oversampling mode, just like the Ares 2. Now in the Ares 2 review, I didn't specify, and it was my mistake, but I was using mostly the non-oversampling mode. And I did the same thing with the Pontus. I'm not a fan of oversampling. I'm a huge believer that oversampling destroys the original track. And that's been from my personal experience of hearing many DACs that does oversampling and promises, without destroying the original track. Now with the Pontus, I found that the non-oversampling mode sounded more analog. It had less sharp edges to it. It was smoother. It was easier to listen to, and it still had all the resolution that I ever asked for. Whereas when I went to the oversampling mode, sometimes on certain tracks, I would find myself finding it a little bit sharp with certain tracks. But with certain tracks that is a little bit more dull sounding and recorded more dark, it did help. So it is something available for you to choose and try. But personally, I left it at non-oversampling mode for the most of it. Now, just because I'm recommending how great it is for the price and the performance, it doesn't mean you should go run and buy a DAC right now. In fact, if your current speakers are not able to receive what the DAC is giving out, then there is no point. And I'm not talking about money. I'm not talking about price points. In fact, the Tecton Lore speaker that is just about $1,000 works perfectly with the Pontus DAC and sounds so good. However, when I hook these speakers up, the Alta Alec speakers, which is about 15,000 Canadian, about 10,000 US, the change is much more substantial. And I'm not saying that because the speakers are, performing better. I switched back and forth between other DACs, and the change from a inferior DAC to the Pontus is much more obvious. And I'm not pulling this out of my ass. I compared directly the Pontus to the Inuit DAC in the system with the Alta Alex speakers, and the change was very obvious. In fact, it was a blind A/B test where I asked my mother, in fact, to change the inputs so that I would not know which input was the internal Inuit DAC and which input was going through the Pontus. And I had my friend over to do the A/B test, blind A/B test as well, and guessing which one sounded better, which one do you guess is the Pontus, and we both guessed within 5-10 minutes of listening. And in fact, I did my listening before he came, and I had a longer time to A/B back and forth, and the change was so obvious. And towards the end, we went to the back and we checked if our guess was correct. It would have been very funny if our guess was wrong, but you can watch that video. I will play for you towards the end of this video. But I just want to leave this video at this note. The Denafrips Pontus, being an R2R DAC, is the most analog sounding DAC I have heard so far. And even compared to my reel-to-reel, which I deem as can't get more analog than that, it is comparable. And although the reel-to-reel sounds more analog with its smoothness and its ability to be more warm and luscious, the Pontus strikes a very good balance between the detail and the nuances that it can pick up and the softness that the analog provides. So the smoothness of the Pontus is very close, and in fact, I prefer the Pontus, and I'm not afraid saying it. I prefer the Pontus even compared to reel-to-reel, because reel-to-reel, depending on your system, depending on your speakers, can sound too soft sometimes. Even compared to DACs that cost $10,000, $20,000, it performs and stands its own ground, which is impressive. Now, the $10,000, $20,000 R2R DACs do sound better, but by how much? By 20 times? I don't think so. There is a huge diminishing cost in performance there, and the Denafrips Pontus is a very good sweet spot for most people like you and myself. And it's something that I would have no problem with keeping in my system for a very long time, and something that I would no-brainer recommend for anyone looking for a musical presentation and have that kind of analog sound without having an analog setup. Analog setup, I can guarantee you, $2,000 and up. There's not a single analog setup with the phono stage and a turntable that can match the performance of the Pontus, in my opinion. Comparing it to other DACs in the similar price range that uses chip DACs like Benchmark or Brooklyn, and I'll specifically compare it to the Brooklyn DAC because I have tremendous experience with that DAC. The Brooklyn DAC is much like the Bryston DAC that I've owned for quite a long time. It is more sharper, it is more edgier, and at first it's very impressive because you hear all the little nuances and details and you're able to separate all the instruments. But the Pontus does that and some more. It adds warmth and musicality to the music. A lot of the times, something that some people will say, I cannot go digital because analog provides warmth and a musicality that digital DACs cannot provide. And that's what I get with the R2R DAC, like the Pontus. A very well-made R2R DAC can sound musical, holographic, like a tube DAC almost, and can really provide that smoothness and analog sound that you may be looking for. And that's something I always look for in my system. And the Pontus may not be for everyone. It may be for me and maybe for a lot of people looking for that musicality, but musicality is such a subjective word, and some people find joy in being able to pinpoint and having that sharp edge to it, having that brilliance to it, that forwardness to it in their sound, that they want something like the Brooklyn or even the Bryston DAC. So For those people, the Pontus may sound a little bit grainy in comparison, maybe too soft in comparison. So of course, the Pontus is not for everyone. But this channel is about my journey and people watching my journey for some reason. So this is my take on the DAC, and I would have no problem recommending this DAC if what you're looking for is what I described. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.
So I think analog 1 is the Pontus DAC, the Denafrips Pontus, and then analog 2 is the Inuus DAC built in. The reason I think so is it's just the attack of the instruments. The Pontus is easier to listen to, while with the Inuus, the decay on the instrument is kind of like sharper.
Like more edgy, less refined.
Yeah, less refined. With the actual Pontus, it's more natural.
We don't know yet. So.
Yeah, I mean that's what I think. I'd be very surprised if it's the other.
This would be funny if it's the other way around.
Yeah. Well, regardless, I prefer analog 1. Guaranteed. Like.
You prefer analog 1?
Yeah.
Okay. My hair on a normal day.
What are your thoughts? Which one do you think it is?
Well, I listened to it before Tujin came so that this bias doesn't happen. Analog 1 sounds hands down better. It definitely has to be the Pontus or this makes no sense because the resolution immediately changes, and the speakers we're listening to right now, as I would probably say in my review, is just very transparent to the source and to the components, and it just opens up. And just like Tujin said, the edge is much smoother, but that's not even the first thing you notice. The first thing you notice is how wide and deep the soundstage, the scape of the sound just changes. So we'll check if it's analog 1 or not.
Yeah.
That'll be funny. Okay, yeah. Okay, so all you have to do is, so these are the Alex, by the way. Alta Alex.
Okay.
Alec, not Alex.
Alec.
Beautiful speakers. So we have the Pontus and the Inuus right here. We have not checked the back yet. So all you have to do, Tujin, is go and check. Follow the cable of the Denafrips and see which analog input it is. It's kind of hard to go there back there with the camera. So
okay, copper color. I need to use a flashlight. All right, moment of truth. It is analog 1.
Is it analog 1?
Yep, it is.
Okay.